Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Bridgetti Banda from Cape Town, South Africa. Greetings, Mr. President, and thank you for your time. Today, we present you with thoughts and messages from our business leaders with regards to the Cape Town water crisis. First is Fred Platt, who's the CEO of Accentuate Limited, a JSE-listed company. He's a proud African and water activist. Welcome, Fred.
Mr. President, when you start understanding that water is a national asset and the ultimate economic enabler, then water becomes a central theme to our national development plan and driven by a strong national leadership moving towards a national water plan that enables and is a driver of success as opposed to moving from one national crisis to the next. The solution to the current water crisis is not a technology-driven one, but rather one that has its roots in a political decision and a political understanding of the value of water and the context of leadership that creates an enabling environment where we can use water to become central. I've called for your leadership intervention in order to establish a water war room where we can embrace the concept and the planning of a central water strategy that will be central not only in terms of providing solutions to the current crisis, but also creates the environment in which we can look at job creation, we can look at development, and we can look at the land issue within a comprehensive framework. I think what drives my thinking is looking at international countries such as the UAE, Israel maybe, or even Singapore, all water-starved countries that have seen water and used water as the ultimate economic enabler. Historically, we know that communities settle down next to water. The presence of water creates activity. The absence of water, we know, will ultimately lead to the demise of a society, as maybe it has done in other civilizations, like the Mayan civilization, over the ages. So if we understand the value of water, then we have a very, very different approach to water. And then we need to take a couple of strong decisions. Number one, the understanding that water is the ultimate enabler. When we have water, if we fly over the Karoo and we see the Orange River, we will see lots of economic activity. And then if we just pass past, we will see a desert. The presence of water is the enabler. And maybe part of our land issue is not so much a land issue, but a water issue. And I think that debate needs to take place. The second thing is the understanding that water is a national asset and has to be dealt with accordingly. And then finally, water is not consumed. It is merely moved from one state to the next. Therefore, we are custodians of water, and we may not just dispose of water. We have a responsibility to reclaim that water, reuse that water, and hand it over to the next generation. Water creates employment, it's a driver of development, and as I mentioned, central to the land issue. When we understand all of this, then we move away from looking at water as water infrastructure as a cost, to an investment in our future, to an investment in development and growth. But as I said, it starts with a political decision, it starts with leadership. All water must be recycled. Sewage and effluent is an opportunity, it's not a cost. And a comprehensive political framework dealing with pricing, dealing with planning permissions. No planning permission should be given unless it addresses the issue of water and the reclamation of water. And then ultimately, as a society, moving towards a zero discharge situation. Once we understand all of that, we can apply a multitude of technologies and people will be lining up to fund it. Mr. President, we look forward to working with you in this regard.
Next, we have Viola Manuel. Viola is the CEO of the Water Leapathon, an NPC working in the water sustainability space.
Good day, Mr.
Viola, welcome.
Thank you. Good day, Mr. President. Just a very short introduction on the overall objectives of Water Leapathon. We, about a year ago, recognized that there needed to be an ongoing conversation in the water space, and specifically around the water shortages, which were starting to make an appearance in the discourse. And we, of course, planned a lot of face-to-face discussions, high-level brainstorming sessions, and our objectives really were to champion short, medium, but more importantly, long-term solutions that would help us create some kind of solution for the long term for sub-Saharan Africa. We, of course, knew that we had to start with our beautiful country and specifically look at the case study Cape Town was now offering us. And the whole objective was, how would we look at these long-term solutions to alleviate any kind of future droughts? To do this, of course, we needed to fully grasp the problem. And one of the things we needed to do was really start saying, do we understand supply, demand, and storage of water? But more importantly, did we understand the socio-economic and upliftment, employment and economic growth challenges that were now facing our city? Ideally, we would like to see Cape Town and its surrounds with an oversupply of water for its people, for industries, especially industries like agriculture. And of course, the ultimate goal or mission of Water Leapathon is really to see, can we get to a point where we have a water-abundant economy that can actually mitigate the ravages of the drought that we're facing? So we looked at how could we start depending on technology and other means to look at dealing with this issue. And of course, to enhance the demand side reduction, but also speaking specifically about consumer engagement. So we started having those discussions, started engaging. At Water Leapathon, what we've done is we've created a very strong media alliance, because we do believe that the media are going to be very important in these long-term solutions. And we have a strategic partnership with a publication called The Messenger, the Cape Messenger. And Cape Messenger, over the last few months, have dedicated about 7 to 10 of their articles speaking to specialists and academics on this water issue, but also speaking to your sort of on-the-ground citizen and asking people to contribute to the water discourse, as well as having a positive ongoing engagement with all the social partners. And one of the things we were able to do is start engaging with labor and government and civil society, starting talking to them about the long-term solutions. And every single social partner was very willing to start contributing to those discussions and moving past the blame game. One of the things we did find is that we had a lot more intense discussion with private sector. And private sector, one of our sessions resulted in a very good outcome, and that was that we needed to create 6 subcommittees to start looking at the long-term solution more holistically. So the first 3 we've sort of pocketed together, and that's the technical subcommittee, which really looks at the technical aspects of desalination, reuse, recycling. And then we had a legal and regulatory subcommittee that would look at how could national government address regulatory challenges towards these long-term solutions. And of course, we also created a subcommittee looking at funding. How would we fund long-term solutions? And what would the framework be that these long-term solutions would find themselves in? What would the context be? We had another pocket of 3 subcommittees where we started looking at things like the community, education of the community, but also citizen engagement. And here again, we established a very good relationship with the Innovation Technology Group, and they created a fantastic system called the My One Zone space, where it was really along the guidelines of the 4th Industrial Revolution, where we start speaking about citizen engagement, putting the citizen at the center of engagement, and actually leaning very strongly on that citizen for high levels of innovation and innovative thinking. We all are depending on national government and the private sector to contribute to this innovative and forward thinking towards the long-term solutions, but we felt that citizens of South Africa could also make a contribution to that. The My One Zone space is really, it's an integrated citizen life cycle engagement platform. And as much as that sounds like a mouthful, what it basically does is it allows citizens at different ages and different stages of their lives to contribute to issues like the water crisis and the long-term solutions. So it offers bi-directional and it enables bi-directional engagement, which was something we were quite excited about. The 5th subcommittee really looked at innovation, skills, entrepreneurship, and started speaking about what skills would be required in this water-abundant economy. and how do we get ready for that skill set? And then the sixth subcommittee would really be looking at the science of water, ongoing R&D around the science of water. What we were hoping would happen is that, and what we are working towards, and what will possibly happen is that these six subcommittees, once they've done their work, would then contribute to a discussion around PPP, and specific PPPs in this water solution space, really looking at long-term solutions. One of the important things, of course, is that we want to learn from our neighbors and say, how possible is it for us to have these PPPs basically run and directed by private sector, funded by private sector? We do recognize that, for example, long-term solutions that are being put on the table now, desalination, there's economic implications to desalination. It's an extremely expensive exercise if you're doing lots of small desal plants. But how can we actually start putting the economics in our favor by creating bigger projects where we are all working together to create those projects, and we're all contributing to funding those projects together? So, Mr. President, that's our contribution. That's the work we have already been doing, and we would love to have a conversation to actually sit down and unpack the detail of what we've done and possibly our plans forward with what we have as a foundation, how we could actually build on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Viola. Up next, we have Peter Rosewarne. Peter has a BSc Honours degree in Geology and an MSc in Hydrogeology, and he has over 40 years' experience in groundwater-related projects.
Dear Mr. President, I'd like to talk to you about some issues concerning groundwater in the city of Cape Town. And this really surrounds three main issues. One is the city's development of major aquifers for groundwater augmentation. Another one is the development by the city and government departments for boreholes for schools, hospitals and parks. And the other one is the issue of multiple installations of boreholes by private landowners and homeowners. So if we look at the bigger picture, Cape Town is surrounded by three major aquifers that I call the big three. This is the Table Mountain Group, the Atlantis and the Cape Platt aquifers. The Atlantis and Cape Platt aquifers are two of the most highly researched aquifers in the country. And the Table Mountain Group aquifer has been investigated by the city since 2002. However, as far as I know, since about the 1980s from the Atlantis aquifer, there's been no new groundwater supplies coming through and being integrated into these cities' groundwater water supply systems. Another concerning thing is that the Table Mountain Group aquifer, Atlantis and Cape Platt aquifer projects are the three biggest groundwater projects ever run by the city. And it's a concern to me that this is all being carried out by one consultant, and there was no public tender for this work. This seems to be a high-risk strategy, and there's very little transparency. A quick example of this is the city has been talking about having found new groundwater, and that's all they say. And this seems a bit strange when we just had the three driest years in the last 100 years that they've suddenly found some new groundwater. So to my mind, there's a very minimum. We need more inclusivity in terms of the expertise available in the city, and as again, a bare minimum peer review by a credible independent consultant or consultants. Now, if we move on to what seems like a lesser issue, the private groundwater use, as to my understanding, there's over 22,000 registered boreholes within the greater city of Cape Town area. And I'm sure there are many, many thousands of unregistered boreholes on top of that. And so water supply, which may be approaching day zero at some stage in the future. Now, again, to the best of my knowledge, we have no idea how much groundwater can be sustained by these local aquifers, which are mainly different to the three big aquifers that are being investigated by the city. No idea how much groundwater can be sustained, and no idea how much groundwater is actually being pumped from these aquifers. And I think this is going to lead to a mini environmental disaster where many of these boreholes are going to start drying up. People are going to be over pumping. There's a possibility of seawater intrusion. That's certainly an issue on a lot of people's minds based on comments that have been received. So I think an urgent requirement is for somebody to get a hold on the amount of water that's being pumped from these local aquifers. So that's just a very brief run through of some of the groundwater issues that I see in the greater Cape Town area. Not really many solutions there. One thing that does occur to me is that increased groundwater abstraction on the Cape Flats could well alleviate the annual flooding that we see there. That's not really flooding in terms of rivers overflowing, it's water table rising. So if there's increased groundwater abstraction, taking the water table deeper, then we might see a reduction in flooding of the informal settlements that we see normally every year. I'm not sure if this is something that the city is actively looking at. So in a bit of a nutshell, that's my take on some of the groundwater issues in Cape Town. I thank you for your time, Mr. President, and look forward to the possibility of some future constructive interaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks.
Dr. Mark Dent holds a PhD in engineering, water resources, and an MBA. He's also the author of over 80 research papers.
Can I go ahead, Bridgetti?
Yes, please do.
Good evening, Mr. President. Thank you for this opportunity to address you. I must just stress that this is not just about Cape Town. In 2016, it was Richards Bay. Now it's Cape Town, and tomorrow stand by for Port Elizabeth. And who knows when it will be Gauteng's turn. This issue really needs to be framed in the risk narrative. Risk is not only a factor of the event and the probability of that happening, but it's also strongly linked to the response from all societal actors. If the response is too late, chaotic, uncoordinated, and financially wasteful, then the damage caused is far greater than if the response is timely due to good systemic understanding and wise because there's time to think about and clearly articulate options to choose from, and then coordinate the responses from all the stakeholders who, if they have engaged properly beforehand, trust one another. There's transparency, the information is trusted. Transparency is key. The responsibility from government in all this, I believe, is to develop a response ability in the society. I just want to make three major points in this in relation to responsible risk addressing in this context. The first one is that water is integral to all sectors. The second point is the inclusive economy strategies must include water and water-related jobs. And thirdly, the skills and capacity does exist in South Africa to address these issues successfully and comprehensively, and don't let anyone make you believe otherwise. Let me start with water as integral to all sectors. It's misleading to talk about the water sector. There's no such thing as the water sector. All sectors are critically dependent on water and need to engage one another in water matters under the oversight of government. If one's looking for evidence of this, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, water is integral to all 17. The World Economic Forum Global Risk Report in 2015 placed water as the #1 global risk. They start that report with a hyperconnectivity of all the factors, and water is connected to all of them. In Cape Town, we see the effect on the broad range of societal actors. Our own policy and legislation framework is about inclusive engagement of all stakeholders. We also need to look no further than the food, energy, and water nexus phenomenon. In a hyper-connected world, we are extra hyper-connected to water, and water is hyper-connected to jobs, and hence the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report placing it as #1. The next point on the inclusive economy strategies and conversations must include water. There are very strong arguments to be made to show how appropriate grassroots efforts in water related matters can contribute significantly to our inclusive economy challenges. Township youth with smartphones and Google Earth links to monitor potable water leaks, water harvesting for townships and food security, solid waste management and recycling, alien invasive clearing in streams and catchment areas, citizen engagement and citizen science that spawns low transaction cost business models for evaluating, monitoring and rewarding activities in the aforementioned would be central to our inclusive economy discussions. Finally, I want to speak about the skills and capacity. I believe it does exist in South Africa to address these issues, both successfully and comprehensively. As a country, we are organizing our skills and knowledge base that we have in a way that leaves vast room for improvement. The Strategic Water Partners Network is a good step forward. Our policy and legislative frameworks provide potential crucibles for engagement, but implementation has been exceptionally poor for various reasons, all of which are surmountable, and mainly because of short-sighted selfishness, and we know better than this, but we're just not willing to change. In government, in business, consultants, and some civil society organizations and many academics, the silo mentality has prevailed. Fragmentation of efforts around water have helped the business models of many role players, and these business models have crippled the country. The metaphor of trying to play football with cardboard cylinders on our eyes is one that comes to mind. Finally, just to recap, water is integral to all sectors. Inclusive economy strategies must include water, and the skills and capacity does exist to successfully address our problems. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Mark. Next up, we have Benoit Leroy. Benoit is a chemical engineer with over 30 years' experience across many different sectors.
Mr. President, good evening. I have one simple statement, and that is, why can we not make water a national priority as the ultimate enabler? And I say this only for two brief reasons. The first one is that the ministry involved seems to be the smallest, or one of the smallest ministries, with a budget of below 20 billion per annum and an accumulated infrastructure arrears deficit of 800 billion rand. Secondly, the blue and green drop reports that were devised by Department of Water and Sanitation as key indicators of the health of our potable water supplies and of our wastewater treatment or sewage treatment have been withheld from the public domain for 2, 3, maybe it's even 4 years now. We know that over 50% of the sewage is untreated and poisoning our rural population, our water courses, agriculture, etc. So if we take these two issues, in my very simple mind, water is not a national priority, and it is really, I think, in you, Mr. President's ambit to enable it to become our first priority that will unlock the economy and the inclusive growth of South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benoit. Next up, we have Dr. Anthony Turton. Anthony Turton is a strategist and a scientist and a water strategist who pioneered the concept of water as a corporate risk.
Good evening. Am I live?
Yes, you are.
Good evening, Mr. President. It is indeed a profound pleasure and a privilege to address you tonight. I address you as my president, and I salute the fact that you have come to power in a very, very dark moment, but you've breathed a fresher breath air into the body politic, and you've given us a new vision of hope and a new vision of a new dawn. So I would like to just say something briefly to you tonight. And what I'd like to say is that the way we've managed water up to now has been based on a false premise. And that false premise is that water is a finite resource and that South Africa is the 30th driest country in the world. These are not true premises. These are false premises. South Africa is not the 30th driest country in the world, and water is not a stock. Water, in fact, is a flux that moves in time and space. And when we continue to talk about this paradigm of scarcity, we've done all we can to squeeze the last drop of water out of our available national water resource. And in so doing, all we are doing now is sowing the seeds of despair because we can get no more water from what we have. And ultimately, we need to recognize that in order to reach all of these noble visions and dreams that we have, these objectives, we are ultimately a water-constrained economy. So my challenge to you, Mr. President, is to use your noble office to start speaking a new language. And that new language is about water as an enabler, to refer to Fred Platt before me, but ultimately the paradigm of abundance. The truth of the matter is that the chemistry and physics of water are extremely well understood today. And we know that water is not a finite resource, it is an infinitely renewable resource. Therefore, we actually have an abundance of water in South Africa. All we need to unlock that abundance is a simple thing called policy certainty. If we have policy certainty, we can then attract capital and technology into that space. I can tell you with a high level of confidence that we do not have a shortage of capital. And I can tell you with a high level of confidence that we have an almost infinite choice of technologies available to us. We have highly skilled people in South Africa. So if we can get this new paradigm of abundance out there, whereby we create jobs through water, whereby we attract foreign direct investment back into the country, whereby we ask euro and dollar-based tourists to come to Cape Town and to flush their toilet as many times as they feel comfortable, because every drop of that water will be recycled. We need to look no further than the city of Perth in Western Australia, which is in a climatically identical zone to the Western Cape. And in the city of Perth, you have 1.2 million people, from which they recover 120 megalitres of high-quality water every day from their sewage effluent stream. So 1.2 million people equals 120 megalitres. Cape Town is a city of 4 million. We can potentially recover 400 megalitres a day of high-quality water to enable the economy. Instead, what we are doing is we're flushing it out to the sea, and we are poisoning the ecosystems, and we are making people angry and unhappy. So my challenge to you, Mr. President, will be supported by whatever support I can muster in this thing. Please start speaking the language of abundance. We need to understand that water is an abundant resource, that our economy is only constrained by the fact that we do not accept the science and the physics of water, that it is an infinitely renewable resource. And my challenge to you, sir, is to bring about policy certainty so that we can attract capital and technology into that space. In closing, I would like to say that one of the fictions that is currently being propagated for reasons unbeknown to me is that desalination is too expensive. Too expensive compared to what? Too expensive compared to have a broken economy with no job creation. Too expensive compared to an economy where we've got capital flight taking place. Too expensive to look at the millions of unemployed people in the eye when we can bring it in at 12 Rand a cubic meter. 12 Rand a cubic meter, that's not too expensive. I think that's a decent, honest price to pay for insulating our economy from the vagaries of nature. So we need an honest conversation. And this is what I look to you, Mr. President. You're an honest man of integrity. You have my support. I'm deeply, profoundly respectful of you. You're my president, and I would like to think of you as our collective president in the country. Thank you, Mr. President.
I apologize for the lack of sound there. Next up, we have Enver Mali. Chair of the Board of the Cape Town Tourism and lead chair of JAMS, the Joint Association Members Meeting Sessions. Enver, welcome.
Thank you. I'm here. Can I speak?
You may go ahead.
Right. Dear Mr. President, in your SONA, you placed the spotlight on the tourism sector as one loaded with opportunities. This is certainly true, as we currently contribute 38 billion and 300,000 jobs to the provincial economy, with a distinct ability to grow this even more. However, this sector is under direct threat by the current water crisis. And at risk are the livelihoods, the jobs, the families, and the substantial contribution to the local economy. Also at risk is our brand as a tourist destination internationally. And I think you would know that once you damage your reputation, it is difficult to get it back. My ask, therefore, on behalf of the tourism industry in Cape Town and the Western Cape is one, that you release the 473 million in drought relief funds to the areas affected to allow local government to expedite the relief efforts, that you look at building infrastructure to increase dam capacity, possibly in the new catchment areas, as this seems to be shifting due to global warming. And another something I want to ask you is to make available funding available to explore alternative water sources so that we're not entirely dependent on rain, such as desalination. We also ask you to keep engaging with the tourism industry as a very real solution to job creation and economic growth. And last but not least, please spread the word that Cape Town remains open for business. One of the problems we're having is that we have such a lot of negative publicity out there about day zero. And sometimes the negative publicity comes from within our own shores and not only offshore. So please speak to the other provinces and please speak to our guests and our visitors overseas that Cape Town is definitely open for visitors, and day zero, should it come, we'll still be looking after our guests and after our visitors. Thank you, and I trust that my request will fall on fertile soil. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the participants this evening. Thank you for your messages to our President with regards to the water crisis. And we look forward to welcoming you again soon on a similar program. Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, Viola Manuel, for joining us this evening.